In 1943, a British engineer stood on a London rooftop and fired a rifle into the River Thames. Pedestrians walked past on the sidewalk below, completely unaware that a weapon had just been discharged directly above their heads. That rifle was so quiet that nobody heard a thing. It was designed to do exactly one job: kill silently. And it did that job better than any weapon before or since. But that rifle is not the only single-purpose weapon of World War II. Every major power built tools designed for one specific mission and one mission only. Some were brilliant, others were disasters that killed more of their own operators than enemies. Today we are ranking every major single-mission weapon of the Second World War, from the absolute worst to battlefield liabilities to the undisputed kings of specialized warfare. Some of these weapons you have never heard of, others changed the course of history. Let us begin the countdown. Kicking off our list at number 20 is the German Goliath tracked mine. This was a small remote-controlled demolition vehicle designed to destroy tanks and bunkers from a safe distance without risking a soldier's life. The operator would hide in a trench and guide the Goliath via thin joystick control connected by a trailing wire. It sounded like a brilliant concept for 1942. The problem was that thin wire connecting the operator to the vehicle. Enemy soldiers quickly learned they could simply cut the wire or shoot it, and the entire expensive machine would stop dead in its tracks. The Goliath was also painfully slow moving at just 6 miles per hour and extremely loud, despite attempts to make it quiet. At roughly 3,000 Reichmarks per unit, which was more than the cost of a Kubelwagen, it was an absurdly expensive way to deliver 60 kilograms of explosives that rarely reached their intended target. Over 7,000 were built, but confirmed successful attacks remain remarkably rare. It was more of a propaganda showpiece than a practical battlefield tool. Allied soldiers who captured them often kept them as souvenirs because they looked so unusual. Next up is the British Wellman midget submarine. This tiny one-man submersible was designed by the Special Operations Executive to sneak into enemy harbors and attach explosive charges to anchored ships. On paper, it sounded absolutely brilliant. A single brave operator would pilot this cramped underwater coffin right up to the enemy battleship, attach a magnetic mine, and slip away into the darkness. In reality, the Wellman was an absolute disaster from start to finish. The pilot had no periscope, which meant he had to surface periodically just to see where he was going. This completely defeated the entire purpose of a covert underwater approach. The interior was so cramped that operators could barely move, and condensation made visibility through the tiny viewing ports nearly impossible. The only notable Wellman mission took place in November 1943 when an attempt was made to attack a floating dock in Bergen, Norway. The mission ended with a Wellman captured completely intact by the Germans, who were delighted to study its design and copy elements for their own midget submarines. It was quite literally a gift to the enemy rather than a weapon against them. Moving on to the German Neger, this might be the most terrifying weapon on our list for all the wrong reasons. The Neger was essentially a manned torpedo carrying a second torpedo underneath. The pilot would sit in a tiny plexiglass dome on top, aim the entire contraption, a tennis ship release the lower torpedo, and then hopefully escape. The word hopefully is doing a lot of work in that sentence. These craft had no ability to submerge properly. They floated just below the surface with only the pilot's dome visibly above the waterline. The plexiglass canopy fogged up constantly, making navigation nearly impossible, especially at night. Carbon dioxide built up inside the cramped cockpit, which caused pilots to pass out. German naval records indicate that the Neger killed significantly more of its own operators than enemy sailors. During one operation against the Normandy invasion fleet in July 1944, over 60 Neger were launched. Very few returned. It was a suicide weapon in everything but official designation, and the young men who climbed into them knew exactly what they were signing up for. Coming in next is the British number 74 sticky bomb. This was a desperate anti-tank weapon invented in the dark days of 1940. When Britain genuinely feared a German invasion across the English Channel. with proper anti-tank weapons in short supply, the special operation executive came up with an improvised solution. The sticky bomb consisted of a glass sphere filled with nitroglycerin coated in an incredibly powerful adhesive. A soldier was supposed to run up to an enemy tank, slap this bomb against the armor, and let the adhesives hold it in place until it exploded 5 seconds later. The fatal flaw was immediately obvious to anyone who had actually seen a tank in combat. Tanks operating in the field are covered in mud, oil, dirt, and debris. The expensive special adhesive frequently failed to stick to anything except the thrower himself. Reports exist of soldiers accidentally gluing the bomb to their own uniforms with predictably horrific results. Winston Churchill personally championed this weapon over the objections of the military ordnance board. It saw limited success in North Africa, where Australian troops used it against Japanese tanks, but it was largely remembered as a dangerous improvisation born of desperation rather than sound engineering. Let us look at the American FP-45 Liberator pistol. This crude single-shot pistol was stamped from sheet metal and could be manufactured in just 7 seconds per unit. 1 million of these bizarre little handguns were produced in 1942 with the intention of airdropping them to resistance fighters across occupied Europe and Asia. The concept was elegantly simple. A French or Filipino partisan would find one of these pistols hidden in a cardboard box with the rounds of 45 caliber ammunition. They would sneak up on a German or Japanese soldier, shoot them at point-blank range, and take their proper military weapon. The Liberator was meant to be a tool for acquiring better weapons, not a combat pistol in its own right. In practice, the distribution plan fell apart almost immediately. Generals like Eisenhower, MacArthur, and Stilwell saw little practical value in the concept and blocked mass distribution. Fewer than 25,000 ever reached France. Most of the million produced were eventually dumped in the ocean or melted down after the war. A few were used by resistance fighters, and there exists at least one documented German account of an assassination with a Liberator, but overwhelmingly it was more of a psychological warfare concept than an actual resistance tool. Next is the British sleeve gun. This was a single-shot suppressed pistol designed to be concealed up a coat sleeve for close-range assassination. Developed by the brilliant engineers at Station 9, the Special Operation Executive's secret weapons facility. It fired a 32 caliber round and was nearly completely silent. The concept was simple. An agent would approach their target in a crowd, extend their arm, and fire once into the body contact range. The suppressor was so effective that bystanders would not realize the shot had been fired. Testing at Station 9 proved the concept worked perfectly. During one memorable demonstration, an operative fired a sleeve gun in a crowded staff bar, and nobody in the room noticed. Despite this impressive proof of concept, there are no confirmed records of the sleeve gun ever being used in an actual field operation. Production didn't begin until late 1944, by which time the war was clearly turning in the Allies' favor. It remains a fascinating curiosity and a statement to British ingenuity, but it never got a chance to change history. Moving down the list is the German Biber midget submarine. This was a one-man submersible armed with 2 torpedoes, designed specifically for coastal attacks against Allied shipping. Unlike the disastrous Neger, the Biber could actually submerge properly, which made it somewhat more survivable for its pilot. The submarine was roughly 9 meters long and could operate at depths up to 20 meters. However, the Biber was plagued by constant mechanical failures, unreliable engines, and severe navigation problems. The single pilot had to handle navigation, weapon systems, and propulsion, all while breathing recycled air in a space barely large enough to sit upright. Of the roughly 390 Biber built during the war, very few achieved confirmed kills against enemy vessels. Pilots frequently became disoriented underwater, and some were found drifting aimlessly on the surface day after their mission began, having run out of fuel or simply lost their bearings entirely. It represented a significant improvement over earlier German single-purpose submersible, but was still fundamentally compromised by the limitation of putting one exhausted man in charge of everything. Next up is the British WW2 folding motorcycle. This tiny single-seat motorcycle was designed to fit inside a standard CLA parachute container and be assembled in just 11 seconds after landing. The special operations executive created for agents and commandos dropped behind enemy lines who needed quick, silent transportation. The full tank held enough petrol for roughly 90 miles at 30 miles per hour. The entire motorcycle weighed just 70 pounds. An operator could pull it from its container, unfold the handlebars, extend the seat, and ride away in under 15 seconds. At least in theory. The reality of airborne operations was considerably messier. Paratroopers often landed hundreds of yards from their equipment containers. Enemy fire and chaos meant soldiers could not always locate their bikes, and the small wheels and weak 98cc engine struggled badly charted roads of actual battlefield. By the time the bike reached mass production, larger Horsa gliders could carry proper full-size motorcycles anyway. Bikes saw some action at Arnhem during Operation Market Garden and at Normandy, but many were simply abandoned by troops who found walking easier than wrestling with an underpowered scooter on muddy French lines. Coming in next is the British Hawkins grenade, also known as the number 75 mine. This was a flat rectangular anti-tank mine about the size of a thick book designed to be thrown underneath the tracks of passing enemy vehicles. It weighed just over 2 pounds and could be easily carried by infantry. When a tank or truck rolled over it, the pressure plate triggered roughly 1 pound of explosive. The Hawkins could also be laid on roads as a conventional pressure mine or placed with tripwires for ambush purposes. It was simply reliable and cheap to manufacture. However, it lacked the explosive power to seriously damage medium or heavy tanks. A Hawkins mine might blow a track of a Panzer III, but it would barely scratch a Tiger. Soldiers found the Hawkins most useful for ambushes against supply trucks, health trucks, and armored cars rather than main battle tanks. It filled a useful tactical niche throughout the war, but never became a truly decisive weapon capable of stopping armored offensives. Let us continue with the British PIAT. This stands for Projectile Infantry Anti-Tank, and it represents one of the most awkward yet surprisingly effective weapons of the entire war. PIAT was designed to give ordinary infantry a reliable way to destroy enemy tanks at close range. Unlike the American bazooka or German Panzerfaust, PIAT used a spring-loaded Pigot mortar system that produced absolutely no back blast when fired. This meant soldiers could safely fire it from inside buildings, through windows, or from enclosed trenches without revealing their position or injuring themselves. The devastating downside was the cocking mechanism. Before firing, the operator had to pull back a massive spring that required roughly 200 pounds of force to cock. Soldiers would literally have to lie on their backs, brace their feet against the weapon, and pull with their entire body weight. Doing this once was exhausting. Doing it while under enemy fire in a muddy trench was nearly impossible. Despite this brutal operating requirement, the PAIT proved genuinely effective when used correctly. Its shaped charge could penetrate roughly 4 inches of armor, and it was effective against bunkers and fortified positions as well. 6 Victoria Crosses were awarded for action involving the PAIT, testimony to both its effectiveness and the extreme bravery required to use it. Next is the British Gammon bomb, officially designated the number 82 grenade. This was an ingenious improvised explosive device designed by Captain R.S. Gammon of the 1st Parachute Regiment. The Gammon bomb was brilliantly simple. It consisted of an elastic stockinette bag attached to a sensitive impact fuse. Paratroopers would fill the bag with whatever amount of plastic explosive the situation required for anti-personnel use against enemy infantry. They might use just half a stick explosive with added shrapnel against armored vehicles or bunkers. They could fill the entire bag, creating a devastatingly powerful hand-thrown bomb. This incredible flexibility made the Gammon bomb beloved by airborne forces who nicknamed it their hand artillery. Unlike conventional grenades, which came in fixed sizes. The gun could be customized for any target. As a bonus, paratroopers discovered that burning a small amount of the C2 explosive would heat their coffee or key rations without producing visible smoke. The gun bomb saw extensive use from 1943 through the end of the war and remained in British service until at least 1957. Moving on to the Bangalore torpedo, originally invented in 1912 by Captain McClintock of the British Royal Engineers stationed in Bangalore, India. This was a series of explosive-filled metal tubes that could be screwed together and pushed through obstacles. Its primary purpose was clearing paths through barbed wire entanglements and minefields without exposing combat engineers to enemy fire. Soldiers would assemble multiple tube sections, connect them together, and slide the torpedo underneath or through the obstacle. A blunt nose section prevented the device from snagging on wire. Once in position, a fuse would detonate the entire assembly, clearing a path roughly 2 feet wide. By the time of D-Day, the British had largely replaced the Bangalore with newer rocket-launched systems mounted on Churchill ARE tanks. American forces, however, continued using the original design extensively throughout the Normandy campaign and beyond. Over 3 million Bangalore torpedo sections were manufactured during World War II, and modern versions of this 100-year-old design remain in active military service today. Now we are entering the specialized vehicles that made the D-Day landings possible. At number 8 is the D.D. Sherman swimming tank. This was a standard Sherman tank fitted with a massive waterproof canvas flotation screen and twin propellers. When properly deployed, it could actually float and propel itself from a landing craft to the shore under its own power. The concept was revolutionary. Amphibious tank could provide immediate fire support for the first waves of infantry hitting the beaches. The execution, however, was absolutely terrifying. For the crew's side, the canvas screen raised the waterline just 18 inches above the sea. In calm conditions, this worked adequately. In rough seas, the tanks took on water, swamped and sank like stones. The crews inside had almost no chance of escape, as 30 tons of steel dragged them to the bottom. At Omaha Beach, conditions were so severe the D.D. Shermans were launched over 3 miles from shore. Most of them sank. 27 out of 29 from one battalion went down, taking most of their crews with them. On calmer beaches like Sword and Juno, the D.D. Shermans reached shore and provided desperately needed fire support. When they worked, they were game changers. When they failed, the men basically drowned in steel coffins. Coming in at number 7 is the Sherman Crab Flail tank. This was a Sherman tank modified with a rotating drum mounted on extended arms at the front. 43 heavy chains were attached to this drum, and when it spun at roughly 140 revolutions per minute, these chains beat the ground ahead of the tank with tremendous force. Any buried mines in the path would detonate harmlessly in front of the vehicle rather than underneath it. The Crab could clear a 9-foot wide path at approximately 1.5 miles per hour. German soldiers defending the Normandy beaches described then the terrifying noise of the chains pounding the earth and mines exploding one after another in rapid succession. The psychological effect was almost as powerful as the practical mine clearing. Crucially, the Sherman Crab retained its standard 75mm main gun, which was turned backward during flailing operations but could be quickly repositioned to engage enemy targets. British and Canadian beaches and Normandy had significantly fewer casualties from mines than American beaches where these vehicles were not used. General Bradley later admitted refusing the Crab was one of his biggest mistakes of the war. Next up is the Churchill Crocodile flamethrower tank. This was a Churchill Mk7 tank with its hull-mounted machine gun replaced by a powerful flamethrower connected to a 2.5-ton armored fuel trailer towed behind the vehicle. The trailer carried 400 imperial gallons of flame, fuel giving the Crocodile a devastating range of over 120 yards. The psychological effect on enemy troops was absolutely devastating. German soldiers frequently surrendered or abandoned heavily fortified positions rather than face the approaching flames. Concrete bunkers that could withstand artillery bombardment were cleared in seconds. When fire poured through their embrasures, the Crocodile was specifically designed to break open the hardened fortifications of the Atlantic Wall, and it did exactly that. These vehicles were so feared by German forces that captured crocodile crews were sometimes summarily executed in violation of the laws of war. Over 800 Churchill crocodiles were built, and they remained in British service until 1951. Moving into the top 5, we have the Churchill AFRE. This stands for Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers, and it was designed to demolish concrete fortifications that conventional tanks couldn't touch. The AVRE's main weapon was the petard spigot mortar, a massive 290mm launcher. The AVRE's main weapon was the petard spigot mortar, a massive 290mm launcher that fired a 40-pound demolition charge nicknamed the Flying Dustbin. This enormous bomb could blast holes through reinforced concrete walls, destroy bunkers with a single shot, and clear obstacles that would stop any other vehicle. The AFREs could also carry a variety of specialized attachments depending on the mission. Passing carriers dropped 8-foot diameter bundles of wooden poles into anti-tank ditches, allowing following vehicles to cross. Bobbing carpet layers rolled reinforced mating ever soft sand. Bridge layers deployed assault bridges across gaps up to 30 feet wide. The Churchill ARK turned the tank itself into a ramp that other vehicles could drive over to scale seawalls. The AFRE was the Swiss Army knife of assault vehicles and proved absolutely essential for breaching Hitler's Atlantic Wall. American forces who declined to use these vehicles at Omaha Beach paid a terrible price in blood. At number 4 is the British Tallboy earthquake bomb. This was a 12,000-pound deep penetration bomb designed by the legendary engineer Barnes Wallis, specifically to destroy hardened targets that conventional bombs couldn't touch. The Tallboy was designed to fall at near supersonic speed from high altitude, penetrate deep underground, and explode after a delay. This created a massive underground shockwave that could collapse tunnels, destroy foundations, and shake hardened structure apart from below. Tallboys sank the battleship Tirpitz in a Norwegian fjord after she had survived every other attack. They destroyed 5 weapon launch sites, collapsed railway tunnels, and penetrated the reinforced concrete roofs of U-boat pens that had withstood thousands of conventional bombs. The precision required to drop these weapons accurately meant only squadrons like the famous 617 Squadron, the Dumpsters, could use them effectively. Just 854 Tallboys were ever dropped, but each one represented a surgical strike against a target that would otherwise have survived the war intact. Taking the bronze medal is the British X-Craft midget submarine. This 51-foot-long 4-man submarine was designed for exactly one purpose: attacking enemy capital ships anchored in protected harbors where conventional submarines and aircraft couldn't reach. X-Craft carried no torpedoes. Instead, they dropped 2 massive explosive charges, each containing 2 tons of metal underneath their targets, and then attempted to escape before detonation. In September 1943, 6 X-Craft set out on Operation Source to attack the German battleship Tirpitz, anchored in Altenfjord, Norway. The journey was over 1,000 miles, towed by conventional submarines through freezing Arctic waters. 3 X-Craft were lost en route to mechanical failure or enemy action. The remaining 3 penetrated the extensive anti-submarine nets, torpedo nets, and bomb defenses surrounding the battleship. X6 and X7 successfully placed their charges beneath Tirpitz's hull. The resulting explosion lifted the 35,000-ton battleship several feet out of the water, crippling her propulsion, fire control, and main armament. She was out of action for 7 months. 2 Victoria Crosses were awarded for this single audacious mission. In second place is the Leslie Carbine. This was a bolt-action rifle built specifically for one purpose above all others: silent sentry elimination. Based on the Lee Enfield rifle action, it was rechambered for the American 45 ACP pistol cartridge, which is naturally subsonic. A massive integral suppressor ran almost the entire length of the barrel. The result was the quietest military firearm ever made. Official testing the Leslie producing just 85.5 decibels when fired. For comparison, a normal conversation is about 60 decibels. Working the bolt to chamber the next round was actually louder than pulling the trigger. During a demonstration in London, the weapons inventor fired several shots into the River Thames while civilians walked past on sidewalks below completely unaware. Only about 130 delisles were ever produced, but those few saw action across multiple theaters. British commandos and SOE agents used them in Burma to silently eliminate the Japanese sentries, enabling missions to proceed without raising alarm. At least 2 senior German officers were assassinated with the Liesels. In 1944, the weapon remained in British Special Forces service through Korea, Vietnam, and possibly even into the 1980s. And finally, the undisputed champion of single-mission weapon is the British Velrod. This bolt-action pistol was designed by the Special Operations Executive at Station 9 for exactly one purpose: silent assassinations at close range. Every single element of the Velrod was optimized for this specific deadly mission. The manual bolt action eliminated the noise of a cycling slide. The integral suppressor reduced the sound of firing to approximately 73 decibels, barely louder than a cough. Portrait barrel bled of gas pressures and slowed the bullet to subsonic velocities. The detachable magazine formed the pistol grip, making the entire weapon easy to conceal. There were no markings of any kind to identify its country of origin. The Velrod was designed to fire approximately 8 to 15 shots before the suppressor's internal rubber pipes degraded to the point of requiring replacement. This was not a flaw, it was intentional. The Velrod was meant for single, carefully planned assassinations, not extended firefights. SOE and OSS agents carried Velrods throughout occupied Europe, eliminating sentries, informers, and high-value targets. The Germans captured several examples and were so alarmed they wrote urgent intelligence report about an enemy silent gun being used for Kopfjägerei, meaning head hunting or assassination. Senior SS officers specifically warned their subordinates about this terrifying new weapon. The Velrod remained classified and in active British service for decades after the war, seeing use in Korea, the Malayan Emergency, the Falklands War, and according to some sources, Desert Storm. When you needed one silent shot to eliminate a target and change history, the Velrod was the answer. It is the purest expression of single-purpose lethality ever created. That concludes our definitive ranking of every major single-mission weapon of World War II, from desperate improvisation that killed their own users to precision instruments of covert warfare. These specialized tools reveal how far nations would go when conventional weapons were simply not enough. If you want to see more deep dives into the forgotten weapons and hidden history of the Second World War, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Let us know in the comments which single-mission weapon you would trust your life with on a covert operation behind enemy lines.